Hi, good morning. Our first session is about a topic that's on everyone's mind, housing for adults with autism and related disabilities. This panel is meant to give us the nuts and bolts of some of the options we have here in the Bay Area. We are very fortunate to have this panel of experts who are very experienced. We first have Jan, oopsies, is the director of Housing Choices, a nonprofit that assists regional center clients in locating housing in their communities. It also advocates strongly for the development of affordable options in the Bay Area. We also have Micaela, who has been on our panel before, and she's here to give us an update on the Kelsey, which is an example of a low-income inclusive housing model. We also have Dana Hooper, Executive Director of Life Services Alternatives, and he will discuss a crucial option of licensed residential homes. Autism dad, Yuli Chettipally, will discuss a family LLC housing model. Then Jan will be back to discuss accessory dwelling units. And because the most common housing placement for our grown children is the family home, advocate Myra Galt will discuss supports in the family home. Finally, Ashley Kim will discuss intentional communities. We'll take questions and answers at the end. Jan, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here to see familiar faces and a lot of new ones. My goal on the panel today is to kind of give you an overview of what's happening with affordable housing and how you can intersect with that resource in the community and create more opportunities for your adult with developmental disabilities to live in their own home. The most important thing to understand is, if you don't already know, and with respect to affordable housing, we're a region in crisis. Across the Bay Area, communities have created up to 5 times as many jobs in the past decade as they have created housing. And the result of that is escalating rents, a lot of housing instability, significantly increasing homelessness rates, longer commutes, and more greenhouse gases. So you're going to have an opportunity to learn from the other panelists about what some other options are, but you need to take seriously the level of crisis that we're in and plan for your child's housing needs at least 5 years ahead. One thing that's helpful to understand is that the housing crisis is affecting people at all income levels up to the 6-figure salaries. This slide shows you that a median 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco rents for $3,100. A lot of people who are working in well-paid jobs are not able to afford a median 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. So the crisis affects many people, not just our community. What does affordable housing mean anyway? Affordable housing covers a whole range of different income levels. The best case scenario for our community is to have an affordable apartment where the rent is limited to 30% of the household's actual income. That's increasingly rare to find. And so when I say plan ahead for 5 years, if that's your goal, you need to get on the appropriate wait lists and be prepared to wait and monitor for a number of years. A more likely scenario in understanding affordable housing across the Bay Area, there are hundreds of properties that have been developed by affordable housing developers where there are fixed rent levels that are set as a defined percentage of the county's area median income. Again, because the Bay Area is such a high-cost area, our median income keeps going up, and so the lowest percentage of affordability continues to increase every year because these apartments have rents that are tied to our region's increasing area median income. Just by way of example, San Mateo County, the area median income increased by 19% in 1 year. So these options where there's a fixed rent level based on a percentage of area median income are more readily available, but the rents continue to go up with increasing area median income. So a couple of examples. Affordability without a rent subsidy, that's the scenario where the rent is limited to 30% of the person's actual household income, that individual's income. This is 1585 Studios in Mountain View. It's one of our partner properties developed by First Community Housing. There's no rent subsidy attached to the property. The rent levels are based on 30% of the Santa Clara County area median income. When we opened the property in 2015, the studios were renting at about $500 a month. Now they're renting at $741 a month because of the increase in area median income. There is a minimum income qualification for these kinds of apartments. Typically, you want to have at least twice the income as the rent in order to meet minimum income qualifications, and that can be very challenging for our community. We were able to negotiate with the developer at this Mountain View property that our units would be income qualified at 1.7 times the rent. So this is an example of one of our partner properties that have been developed without any rental subsidy that limits the individual's rental contribution to 30% of their household income. You'll remember the best case scenario is when there's a rent subsidy so that the individual will only pay 30% of their household income in rent. This is another one of our partner properties in downtown Santa Cruz, Water Street Apartments. We were able to work with the Housing Authority of Santa Cruz County to get project-based vouchers subject to a preference for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Because of the project-based vouchers, this is Rosemary. She's in her late 30s. She's lived in her family home her whole life. Her family lives in near downtown Santa Cruz. Her income is $940. She is renting a 2-bedroom apartment with a live-in aid for less than $300 a month. So you see what a difference it makes whether there is an attached rental subsidy to the property. All of these options are out there. Waiting lists are very long, and it's challenging. It takes diligence and persistence over time to get one of these units. So what are you looking for in affordable housing? It's not just price. The number one factor that families tell Housing Choices is of concern to them is they want to be in the community where their adult grew up and has support systems, relationships, knows how to use the bus, knows how to get to Target, and so forth. And so location can be a big constraint. Every community has some supply of affordable housing, but not enough. And then the other constraint will be unit size. It's going to be easier to get a studio apartment than to get a 2-bedroom, which you may need if you have a live-in aid. You're also trying to assess the quality of property management, because that can have a big impact on the adult's day-to-day experience. And then another factor is whether services are coordinated with the housing. At Housing Choices Partner Properties, we have a resident coordinator who works at the housing site, and that's a level of support for housing retention and housing stability above and beyond each adult's IHSS or independent living or supported living staff. Quality of design and construction. Most affordable housing is built to extremely high standards, increasing standards for design and building and sustainability. And then you're also going to assess community spaces and how are they used, because the social dynamic of affordable housing is important to our kids. So finding an affordable apartment, as I mentioned, the apartments are out there. There's not enough of them. It's hard to find them, and you have to wait a long time. And the reason for this, beyond the limited supply, each property has its own property management. So if you're looking at 1585 Studios, there's going to be a property manager at 1585 Studios that you have to contact about that individual building. Each property has its own waiting list for affordable housing. its own application process, its own mix of unit sizes, income and rent guidelines. Increasingly in cities across the Bay Area, there are local live-work preferences. So if you're applying for a property in Belmont, the city is probably going to have a live-work preference. So if your child doesn't live in Belmont or work in Belmont, you may constantly be displaced by residents of that city who are applying. And then increasingly, we're seeing preferences for other special needs, particularly the homeless. A huge influx of state and local funds to house the homeless. And so they're occupying more of the oxygen in the room in terms of new properties that are coming online. So there are challenges, and it takes time. Fortunately, you're not on your own. If you're with the regional center, you can expect support for a planning process about where the adult will live that should begin at the 18th birthday, if not earlier. And what I would encourage everyone to think about is not only plan for where the adult will live, what services they'll need, when this is likely to happen, but I also encourage everybody to start thinking about having a CalAble account. CalAble funds can be used to subsidize the cost of housing without reducing SSI. You can encourage everyone in the family to donate at Christmas time or birthdays to the CalAble account, and there'll be some contingency fund for increased housing costs. Housing Choices is available in 5 counties to help you with the housing search. We're not available everywhere, but the DDS has replicated the services we provide, and they're now a vendored service that should be available in every regional center. So the housing search and housing retention service that's available from Housing Choices, you should be working with your regional center to make sure that service is provided. Fair housing, the number one documented category of discrimination is discrimination based on mental disability. It's above discrimination based on physical disability. It's above discrimination based on age, household size, race, ethnicity. And so that category, of course, also includes mental health, but it's our kids too. So discrimination, intentional or unintentional, is real, and we have to have our eyes open about that. There's another category of discrimination called disparate impact, where there can be rules and policies put in place by the property manager that have the effect of unfairly burdening a person with an intellectual or developmental disability. And so, for example, you would want to have a 2-bedroom apartment if your adult child needs live-in aid. If the property manager says, no, you only have one person in the household or 2 people in the household, you can only have a 1-bedroom, that would be a rule that has a disparate impact on people with disabilities. So there are policies in place that disparately impact our community, and the property manager is required to give a reasonable accommodation for that. In terms of dealing with discrimination, of course, there's Disability Rights California, there's an organization called Project Sentinel, and there's your local legal aid. I want to talk about Section 8 because when families come and talk to Housing Choices, they have an idea that the housing solution is going to come to them in the form of a Section 8 voucher. And in reality, most housing authorities have closed waiting lists for Section 8 vouchers. A Section 8 voucher enables your adult child to pay only 30% of their household income in rent, and they can choose an apartment anywhere in the community where the landlord accepts Section 8. So waiting lists are either closed, they may open, but it's really not a likely solution. Now, what some housing authorities are doing is they're making project-based vouchers. It's like a Section 8 voucher, but it's attached to the unit. They're making those vouchers available to apartments that are subject to a preference for people with disabilities on the rationale that they need to have coordinated services with them. And that's what we've been advocating for. We've gotten it in Santa Cruz County. We've gotten it in San Mateo County. Haven't been successful in Santa Clara County, but it's something that the family community has been involved in helping us advocate for. So the typical voucher, difficult to get, not likely to get, but project-based vouchers as a community we can come together and advocate for. The other thing that you should know about housing choice vouchers is if you go on Craigslist and look for an apartment, you'll see no Section 8, no Section 8, no Section 8. So California has adopted statewide legislation that goes into effect in January, prohibiting discrimination based on source of income, including Section 8. So landlords will no longer be able to put no Section 8 on their Craigslist ads. They may find pretexts for not accepting Section 8, but we should see more openness for those of you fortunate to have a Section 8 voucher to actually be able to use it in your community. Because again, local is what our families overwhelmingly want. They want housing opportunities in the communities where people grew up. And so that brings me to my final slide. How do we get that housing in the local community that's truly affordable? Families organize to get it. Cities are obligated under their housing element to address the housing needs of people with developmental disabilities. They're often completely oblivious to it, but when we organize and go to them and talk to them about that, we are able to get their affordable housing plans to include some units for people with developmental disabilities. So we can make a difference. It happens locally, and it's locally that you care about because you want your adult to stay in your community. We have 18 partner properties with 300 units set aside for people with developmental disabilities. We have 6 properties in the pipeline. 2 of them are in San Mateo County, Belmont and East Palo Alto, where we just started working. And there's a group of families organizing in South San Francisco. If there's anybody here in South San Francisco, please come see me. And then we have 4 properties in construction or planning in Santa Clara County, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, San Jose, and Palo Alto. So this is how, as an organization, we've been able to support your advocacy to create more housing opportunities in your own community, near the resources and the people and the supports that matter to your adult child. Yay, I did it. Thank you, Jan.
Before we bring up Micaela, 2 quick announcements. First of all of these slides for the first session and the second session have been posted on our website, so you don't furiously have to take photos and write down everything. They're on the website. You can download them as PDFs. The other thing is I saw people standing in the back. There are lots of chairs, some in front. People have their bags on chairs. Just be nudgy and say, move your bag, lady, and have a seat, okay? Thanks. Okay, Micaela Connery.
Great. Hi. I'm excited to be back here. I was here 2 years ago, fresh out of grad school when I was still volunteering at the Kelsey, so excited to come back and update you all and share what we're learning. So I don't need to talk much about the problem because everybody here in this room is pretty deeply familiar with it. But we do think it's important as families and as people with disabilities and as advocates in the community to have some common language about how we speak about this. So when people say, why do we need housing for people with disabilities? What's happening with that? We always remind people that it's a gap in 3 areas. There's a lack of affordability, there's a lack of accessibility, and there's a lack of inclusivity. And then affordability is really a financing challenge, as Jan just spoke about really deeply, and so I won't talk too much about that, but that affordability is an issue when projects are financed, that they're not affordable to people at the lowest incomes, but they're also not even affordable. I remember meeting with a parent who said, for all the money in the world, I can't buy what I want for my kid. And so we see affordability at both ranges, and the Kelsey thinks it's really important to really provide deep affordability for those who need it, but to also provide a way for families who have middle or higher incomes to be able to buy into models. We also talk about the accessibility gap, and accessibility is really a design and a siting challenges. So it's how projects are located, as Jan spoke to, where projects are based. Are they accessible to services, to communities, to amenities, to recreation, to jobs? And also, are they designed accessibly? And for this community, I think we often see that people talk about accessible design in kind of ADA ways, And I think it's really important when we talk to architects or designers or planners that we also talk about what kind of design works in a sensory-friendly way. What kind of design needs are to be taken into consideration for people with very high support needs or very challenging behaviors? How do we look at units? How do we look at common spaces? How do we look at safety and design? And then the third key gap, and perhaps where I'm most passionate about, is a gap of inclusivity. And that's really an operations challenge. That what we've heard from people is that even when they have access to housing that's affordable and accessible, when they're that sort of lottery, small group of 12% of people who actually got their own housing, or for people who are able to find housing in other ways, that they still are isolated from their communities and they're not feeling fully included and they don't have an identity and they don't have relationships and there's not kind of the joy and thriving and everything that makes life life. And so the Kelsey's really committed to solving for all three of these, affordability, accessibility, and inclusivity at the kind of phases that they need. The tools that we think about using for this are kind of threefold, and we try to take a scaled whole systems approach where we look at both the housing, the funding, and the organizing. And we think these are three really key levers, that on the ground, we need to accelerate the development of inclusive housing, and that's housing in communities. These are communities that are developed with the sole intention of being fully inclusive to people with disabilities, but also then including housing for other affordable units, including market rate housing, including other housing vulnerable populations, or populations that could be complementary to people with disabilities. We also think organizing is really key, that we can demonstrate really cool things on the ground, but if we don't sort of scale through community-based and state and federal organizing, then we're not going to be able to scale our best practices. And so we do things like share practices in our Learn Center, participate with partner organizations in regional and statewide advocacy, and try to inject disability into the places that it's not being spoken about. So in some of the key policy and philanthropy and funding areas to push the organizing forward. This all, though, as somebody who's not super motivated by money, nothing has ever motivated me about money more until this issue, because I learned very quickly that he who has the gold makes the rules. And we in the disability community have very little gold. And so we're really also super focused on this funding piece of how do we unlock philanthropic, private, and public capital to support disability inclusive housing in our communities. And that means advocating on a local level and a state level and a federal level for public sources. It also means that our community needs to be taken into account with the development of philanthropic and concessionary lending that's going towards affordable housing, that there should be targeted funds for our community. So the Kelsey is actually working on our first $25 million raise by the end of next year for our first two projects, but our ultimate goal is to build an $100 million fund that's an evergreen fund to support philanthropic and concessionary lending towards inclusive housing projects for people with and without disabilities. We're putting that work into play right now. We have two projects in development, and actually you guys are the first people that I'm speaking publicly about our second project, so hot off the presses. Our first project in San Jose will break ground next year. That is the Kelsey in both of these cases is a co-general partner with development partners, so we get to really control those three areas. We really inject on what's the affordability we need, how is it designed to be accessible across all the various features that accessibility means, and then how is it operated to be inclusive. And so both of these communities are relatively similar. They include a mix of market rate or middle income housing, affordable housing for people kind of working full-time minimum wage jobs, and then deeply affordable housing at 20% AMI for people who are SSI reliant, who have developmental disabilities. I think one of the interesting features of our San Jose project in particular is that we actually have units that are market rate set aside for people with developmental disabilities. So we have a combination of, if you go through the lottery process and you need an affordable unit, you can get that affordable unit. But if you say, I just want to rent a unit for my child at market rate rents, you can also have that option to do that. One of the key elements of our model related to inclusivity is that as I traveled around the country and visited different housing models, there was this growth of kind of different types of communities that had live-in staff. And so, but we really are trying to also decouple housing and services and not be a service provider. But we designed this role called an inclusion concierge, and those are one inclusion concierge per 10 to 15 residents, and they live and work full-time in the community. So both of these projects have two full-time live-in inclusion concierge Those are funded through the operating expenses of the building. And most importantly, those are not just a service for the people with developmental disabilities who live there. They're an amenity for everybody. So I think about when I first moved to San Francisco and I wanted to go to Hardly Strictly, that my inclusion concierge could set up residents from my building to go to Hardly Strictly with me. And so it's a real amenity for everybody to promote genuine inclusion in the community. And so last but not least is always this question of what can families do? And I think you have a plethora of resources with some of the leaders in this community. We really break down our areas in three key sectors. Share your story. So as we talk to funders or policymakers or community leaders, people have no idea about the housing needs for autism and people with developmental disabilities. And so we really need to be better about articulately and clearly sharing our stories. And so the Kelsey, actually Eric on our team, is working on a campaign in 2020 where he's helping people with disabilities and their family members capture stories in writing and online. So please reach out and we'd love to help you be a part of that storytelling. You can advise our developments. We have 2 community advisory groups, one in San Jose and one in San Francisco. You can help unlock new capital. That's the best side. Help unlock new capital through new public, private, and philanthropic. And you can get involved in a plethora of other ways. So here's our contact info, and I will now STF you. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dana Hooper, and I'd like to start by thanking Jill and the Autism Society for putting on this event. I've been asked to speak about group housing, and we'll try and cover it in my allotted 10 minutes. First of all, this is a category that remains important. It's been traditionally one of the main categories beyond the living at home. Capacity has been flat to declining, and this is a function of frozen rates and costs escalating. Many of new models, specialized homes have come online, and these have been geared towards housing the individuals leaving developmental centers. And finally, the HCBS rules have tended to negatively impact capacity. What are the numbers? If you look on the right, over 22, still roughly 60% of the individuals in Santa Clara and the 3 surrounding counties live at home. Another 21% live in supported living or independent living, and almost 17% live in adult residential facilities. I'm going to talk more about what they are. Going to quickly overview it. Key understanding is that there are levels, and I'll compare it to supported living, and we could talk about pros and cons. First of all, it's a residential model that's geared around 24-hour-a-day residential care. They're always licensed by community care licensing. They're vendorized by the regional center, and they come in multiple different levels and types, so one size does not fit all. Typically 4 to 6 residents per facility. This is a group living model. Service providers must secure the housing, so the burden of finding the housing is on the provider. The rate itself compensates the service provider for food, room, board, and all the support and care required. So it's an inclusive model. Staffing is 24/7. And typically residents go out to a job or a day program during the day. There are some for-profit and nonprofit organizations. It does make a difference. I mentioned levels. So levels really are geared around needs, whether it's needs with daily living, whether it's needs getting around, whether it's need keeping the individual and others safe. So the higher the level, the higher the staffing, the higher the rate. And that's kind of the basics of the way the model works. And always, if there's additional funding required, it can be justified as it relates to keeping that individual safe. There are different kinds. The most common are adult residential facilities, age 19 to 59, or RCFEs, which are intended for elderly adults, so 60 and older. The other three models are very specialized, and more information is available on them if it's applicable to your son or daughter. Levels, in general, the levels of adult residential facilities go from 1 to 4, with 4 meaning higher levels of needs in either daily living, ambulation, or keeping one safe. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it's important to understand the whole concept and how it works. How do these homes compare with supported living? Well, first off, geared towards more individuals. Supported living kind of got started around supporting one individual, and in the case of housing and supported living, the individual is responsible for securing housing. Not so in the case of community care facilities. Supported living covers support. The individual covers their own housing cost. Typically, they're very similar in terms of either going to a day program or providing essentially a day program vis-a-vis staff during the day. And in many of the other ways, they are similar. But the key difference, I think, boils down to the notion of living in a group environment as opposed to an individual or a couple of individuals. Pros, it's obviously open to opinion and experience. Mine comes from having a son in supported living and running an organization that provides group housing. I think the main difference in my way of looking at it is the opportunities for socialization. Living with others in a structured environment provides lots of opportunities for developing social relationships, doing things in the community in an inclusive, in a diverse way. It also tends to be an opportunity that has a lot of built-in oversight. And I know, to me, oversight is important. I like the fact that there are multiple staff, that there is oversight by community care licensing, by the regional center, that there is a lot of, if you will, backbone behind the model. Probably the number one shortcoming is it is also a group model, and there are less staff than there are residents. So inherently, there are trade-offs that have to be made in terms of attending to everyone's individual needs, which is clearly the objective here. So those trade-offs are not unlike the trade-offs that happen in everyday life. There's more to learn about the model. I'm referencing a community care licensing website. There are a lot of other sites. This afternoon, I'm going to be talking more about what's it take to create a community care home, and how you might get involved in building capacity, because clearly there's not enough capacity for the demand. And that session is this afternoon at 1:30 to 2:30. I think it's in 208 in this building. Just to wrap up, this is a model that is no better or worse than the service provider and its implementation. So always be cognizant of that. when you look into it, you want to look into that service provider because that's the continuity of care going forward. Thank you very much. Did I finish early?
No, you're good. You're good. Yuli.
Looking at Feda here, I'm getting PTSD symptoms back. I have 6 minutes. My name is Yuli Chettipally. I'm a parent of a young lady. We are a part of a housing project called Clearwater Ranch Community. That's my daughter, our daughter, Siri. I'm sure you'll see her in the lobby area. By the way, we did not steal that name. Apple stole it from us. Siri is a 27-year-old woman. She falls in the middle of the spectrum. Very little verbal. She's minimally verbal, I would say, but she can get her points across. She is very talented, and she's a lovely child most of the days. So what are our fears? When we have a child with, a developmental disability, we worry about, who will take care of her. That's the parents' thinking, right? When we are gone, who will take care of her? And where will she live? Right now she's living at our home, a family home, with us parents and her two brothers. But what happens, once we are gone and the brothers go about doing their own things? What will she do? What kind of work? What kind of activities? And what will she do with all her, with her day? Will she be sitting watching videos all day, which she loves to do? And how do we go about planning? There's so much information. As you can see here at this conference, there are so many different types of housing options, especially if you can afford and find those, right? That's a tricky thing. So first thing we decided was, she needs a permanent home. We don't want her moving from place to place for whatever reason. We want her to stay in one place, because obviously she likes consistency, and most of us do like that consistency. So what are the things that are needed to make that permanent home possible? What are the ingredients that go into it, right? So we want a community. We don't want her living alone. We don't want her relying on one person or one family that is taking care of her. We want a whole community taking care of her, providing the love and care. We want her to have opportunities to work and play. Work means, it's a long process for us, families with developmental disability kids, right? They have to be trained, they have to learn new skills. They have to have an opportunity where they can actually go and do a job at their level. And hopefully it is a very supportive environment. And same thing with play. Siri is a very active child. She loves to do a lot of stuff, skating, riding a bike, you name it, she loves to do that. And so we want that. And the third thing we wanted was the environment has to be healthy. The food she eats, the way the house is set up, the sound levels, and it has to be safe. So, we make sure that, there are enough eyes that are watching her and helping her. So, what we found was that a multi-family ownership model is what will work for us or work for her. So here, this is where, as the name implies, a lot of families come together. In our case, we're expecting about 20 to 24 families coming together. We will own multiple homes in an area that is a single piece of land. And then each of these houses will have, 4 or 5 or 3 residents, and 1 or 2 regular people. There will be an on-site community manager. We call them home companions. And then the rent will be paid by SSI and SSDI income that the individual gets, so they don't have to pay. Of course, the family buys into the community. And then the regional center will be running the day programs wherever they are in the community, so they'll be part of that, so they'll be going outside for that. And then, of course, depending on your needs, there'll be ILS and SLS caregivers. So that's all I have to tell you, and we are excited about this project, and we'll be doing an afternoon session Q&A. And there are other parents and families that are around, so you can ask questions. Thank you.
Great. So you're going to hear about housing models that really require a lot of collaboration with community and with other families. I'm going to talk to you about a housing model where you're in the driver's seat as a parent. It's called an accessory dwelling unit. Just real quickly, can you raise your hand if you're a homeowner? Okay, so this is something to think about. An accessory dwelling unit is a separate permitted dwelling unit that's fully contained that you can develop on your single-family parcel.
Yeah, closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Or we can bring it.
So separate legal dwelling unit that you develop on your single-family parcel. It can be new construction detached from your home. It can be a cottage. It can be new construction attached, just an extension of your existing home. It can be a garage conversion or other outbuilding conversion. And it can also be a unit that's developed within the footprint of your existing house. And these are all allowed under most local zoning ordinances, and it's getting increasingly easy to develop them. But the key thing to understand is that it's an option that you can control. You can be in the driver's seat. You already own the land, which is the single biggest cost for developing housing, and you will have long-term control of the asset, and you'll be very involved in monitoring the service transition. I think when we talk about the importance of being in a community that your adult already knows, well, you can't get much better than an accessory dwelling unit because they're going to be living right in the neighborhood that you're living in. The big barrier to developing an accessory dwelling unit is just the amount of responsibility that you have to make it happen. You have control, but it also, because of that control, it doesn't happen without your work. And that's going to involve getting permits from your local government, securing financing, developing a design, negotiating with a contractor, and monitoring construction. So quite a bit of work to take on. What will it cost? I think you have to plan for architect fees, city permit fees. The biggest single cost is construction, and construction costs per square foot keep going up in the Bay Area. Furnishings and appliances, construction period interest, allowance for contingency. In terms of construction costs, there are ways to design to reduce construction costs, and that's what an architect can help you do. But if you think about creating a 650 square foot apartment, if you will, as an ADU, and multiply that by $300 a square foot, you see we're getting up into the $250,000, $300,000 level when you add in all the other costs. So it's a pretty significant financing commitment, but it's definitely an asset that will be yours and that you'll control and that you'll get the value out of. Alternative building methods are making it cheaper and easier. So there are a lot of companies that are developing modular accessory dwelling units that can be transported and set up in your parcel. There are shipping containers, there are panelized walls. There are ways to bring the cost down, but it's not cheap. What's important to know is that there are new state laws in California that are really displacing a lot of local zoning barriers. So it's pretty easy now to develop an ADU. There are significantly lower setback, parking requirements, owner occupancy requirements, a lot of local restrictions. California over the past 3 years has just knocked away and said we want to encourage this type of housing. There are cities and counties across the Bay Area who are really getting on board with promoting accessory dwelling units as a solution to the housing crisis. I've listed some of the resources here. They have great how-to manuals, sample plans online. And there is also an effort to tackle the financing challenge, which I'm going to talk about, by the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley. So financing remains the single greatest barrier. If you don't have $250,000 sitting in your bank account, then you're going to need to think about refinancing your existing mortgage or utilizing a home equity line of credit. In terms of refinancing, the biggest barrier is that lenders want to look to the stream of income that you have at the time you make the loan application. And so you won't have proven rental income at the time you apply to refinance. So right now, a barrier is that lenders are going to allow you to refinance based on your current household income rather than the rental income stream that will be coming from the property. So we're seeing more and more families pursue this option. One family in Half Moon Bay has developed an ADU. They spent several years trying to buy a condo, and Half Moon Bay is a primarily single-family neighborhood. Development is difficult because of Coastal Commission and other regulations. They looked at buying a boat. What do you call those? Houseboat? Down at the harbor. They looked at buying a condo. They considered many options, and then they developed their ADU. And so you'll see that they built out the ADU as an extension to their existing home. Because of permit requirements, they needed to have some of the floor area of the existing home incorporated in the ADU. So they built a 650 square foot ADU as a bump out of their existing home with help from the planning department of the city of Half Moon Bay. And so here's their beautiful accessory dwelling unit. And what this family decided is that the parents were going to live in the accessory dwelling unit. And their adult son is living in the main house with caregivers. And you can see their accessory dwelling unit. It's a small but beautiful one-bedroom apartment, basically, built the way they want it. It's built for them. So the Palmer family has really been great in promoting this as an option. One of the stories they'll tell you is that when they first moved into the ADU, they had dinner with their son and his caregiver every night. And now, a couple of years later, they have a family dinner once a week. So the ADU has really helped them create an individual family transition plan. They have longtime trusted caregivers who've been helping them for years, and they are now able to provide a home for those caregivers, right? But they're monitoring at every step of the way, and I think that's another great benefit of the ADU is that you get to be as involved as you need to be in the early years, and then you get to step back as your adult child gets used to living without you in their immediate footprint. So if you're a homeowner, definitely worth thinking about. Thank you.
No, it's Myra. Sorry. We love you, Ashley.
Good morning. I am really excited to be here. I'm the parent of 3 children with Down syndrome. I'm Myra Galt, sorry. And I also have 7 birth children. 2 of those have had autism, and I have 4 adopted kids with Down syndrome. So I'm here as a parent, but also I own an advocacy agency. We work statewide to help families get the right services that their children need, whether it be get the right services through regional center or in-home support services. So today, this little slideshow is just to talk about some ideas. If you choose to do what Jan was suggesting, keeping your child in your own home, adding something to your home, we added a tough shed, fully fixed up, and it's now my 16-year-old's she shed, but because our boy moved out. But I want to just talk to you about why you would want to keep your child in your own home. Now, I have nothing against any of the other options. I just know with my kids who are in their mid-20s, I just haven't had much luck with any of the other options. So we have them at home. And so the beautiful thing about keeping them at home is they don't have to relocate. They're at home. I can't imagine moving my daughter Emily. They aren't going to have to move. It's a set place. And safety is always a big thing at our house. And a lot of times I have friends and a lot of my clients that are in residential placements, and there's a hard time keeping staff. So what are some things that you can get in the home? One of the benefit programs that most of the people that come to my speaking engagements or come to my office that they don't know much about is in-home support services. And this is a program that we call the Secret Service, because nobody wants to tell you about it. I'm on the board of directors for the Coalition for Welfare Reform up in Sacramento, and I am always amazed when I speak either for them or for my own agency, and I have a group of like this, how many people don't know anything about protective supervision. And in-home support services can give you, it can pay you, the parent, if you so desire, or it can pay a relative, a friend of the family, or a total stranger that you choose. Care.com is a good place to go looking. To come in and cook, clean, do the laundry, shopping, help with bathing, help with dressing, giving medications, taking them to their medical appointments, dental appointments, any kind of appointments that they need, and paramedical services, for example, shots for insulin. I had to think of that for a minute. But the big thing that most parents worry about with autism, a lot of our kiddos have 24/7 need for protective services. We can't leave them. So this program can pay a parent, believe it or not, tax exempt. It's tax exempt if you do the work or they live in your home with you and you're doing the work. Up to $5,000 a month. Over in San Francisco, it's over $5,000. Depends on the county you live in. Typically throughout the state, if you're getting protective supervision, you're getting paid anywhere between $3,500 or $3,800 and $5,200 a month. The counties pay by the hour and you get overtime. It's really important to note that, a lot of parents with their adult kids or younger, sometimes we feel like we can do a better job than someone else. So the beauty of having in-home support services is the money that you're paid can go for anything you want it to. We're saving for a trip to Europe. And so this money can be whatever you want it to be. They have a registry. So if you can't find someone, I've gotten a couple of good people off of the registry, but you yourself can be the paid care provider. There are other services that can be pushed into your home, and some of them have been mentioned this morning. One is supported living services. There's independent living services, both of which you can get through the regional center. There's personal assistance. Let me just tell you, with my 2 daughters that live at home still with Down syndrome, my husband and I each are paid for each of the girls through in-home support services. And then on top of that, we get 2 to 3 hours every day of the week for personal aid, a personal assistant. So that way, he and I can still carry on a job throughout our day. Weekends, we get a personal assistant, up to 10 hours over the weekend. On top of that, we could be having supported living services. I just don't feel I need it. But you can get that too. So basically, if you chose to keep your adult child in the home, most of the hours of their day are going to be covered if you know how to make that happen. I am going to be speaking a little later today on in-home support services. How do you get it? What if you've been denied? And all of that. But today, right now, I just want to tell you there's hope if you decide you want to keep your child with you. There's hope. You can have push-in services. The problem we all run into as parents is no one wants to freely hand it over to us. And so that's kind of what we like to do in our agency, is help you get all that. With supported living services, it kind of sounds a little bit like in-home support services, but they're not the same. The supported living services is someone can help your child figure out where they want to live. They can help with choosing housemates. They can help with household furnishings, common daily activities of living. Now, what if you decided you wanted to put your child in one of the models that have been described here today, their own apartment? All of these services are good for that too. So whether you choose to keep them in your home, or you chose, like a lot of my families I work with, they chose to pay for an apartment and have their child there, and maybe their child is very, very high need, but with all of these services, their child is doing fabulous in their own apartment. The only time you cannot get some of these benefits is when they are in a residential facility that's licensed. Level 4I, for example, is where my girls would go. The level 4 we heard about from Dana, it means the most needy, and I is the very most needy, and there are very few of those placements in the state of California. There's a big need if you want your child there to open those locations. But between the supported living services and the in-home support services and the personal assistance that you can get through the regional center, your child can be pretty well covered, so you still can live your life. On top of that, and I didn't include it in my PowerPoint here, is the out-of-home respite or respite. Your child can get that as an adult. Out-of-home, my girls go every month down to Cupertino to Via West, and it's this amazing place where they go next weekend, and it's kind of our weekend with my, God has a sense of humor. I had a child at 46, she's sitting up here, she's almost 16. So that weekend is our weekend. Dad takes the girls to camp, and they love camp. There's horseback riding, and so if your child is in their 20s, that's still an option, just to let you know. So the idea when we keep our kids in our home is, when do we get time, right? So hopefully I've encouraged you that if you choose to keep your child in your home or in a home that you choose for them, that there are ways to support them. And if you need help, you can always call my agency or call the Coalition for Welfare Reform in Sacramento. You can find me there. It was nice to be here, and I hope I gave you a little bit of encouragement this morning.
Again, if you're standing in the back, there are actually lots of seats, or a lot here, and you can just tell people to move their stuff off their seats. Quickly, I think one thing really, it's an important question, and I am going to interject it here, Myra. SLS, Supported Living Service, is generally not available to somebody living in the family home. That's an exclusion criteria. Can you just quickly comment on the ILS, Independent Living Service, is?
That's typical thinking. I've been able, now maybe it's because the regional centers fear me, but I've been able to get both for kids that are staying in their home. However, it's really useful if they're living in a home, like an apartment that you've chosen for them. So when I'm thinking of keeping your kids in your home, it can be your house or it could be an apartment down the street. So there's supported living, there's independent living, and some regional centers get them mixed up. My local regional center is wonderful at giving families like mine both. So you just kind of sometimes have to try.
Can you just explain what the difference is between supported living and independent living services?
Yes, independent living services is where, for example, maybe I want to teach my daughter Molly how to cook because she says she's a wonderful chef. She has Down syndrome and she's not a wonderful chef. It would be dangerous. But let's say I want her to learn to cook. Independent Living Services Regional Center would send someone in to help my child learn how to cook. And that might take a very long time, but oh well, that's what they can do. They can teach them to do laundry. They can teach them to go grocery shopping. So any of the tasks of everyday living is what the Independent Living Services is all about. Supported living works much better if you're choosing to put your child in an apartment building or in a living situation with a couple of regional center clients. But I have been successful at getting both, and in-home support services.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ashley Kim. I'm with Together for Choice, which is a national advocacy organization that believes in the individual's rights to choose where they should live and receive services in the setting of their choice. So I'm here to talk about intentional communities. Unfortunately, the models that I'm here to talk about are not based in California, but I hope that these models are great enough to inspire you to dream big and hope for the better future of your child. So why intentional communities? We believe that individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities should have access to a full array of services coordinated based on individuals' evolving needs and preferences, and we believe that that's truly person-centered. And it should be beyond custodial care. It should be beyond safety, and that should be, about just having enough food to eat and having enough activities to do. But it should be about living a meaningful life and with a purpose through very sophisticated and enriched programs and activities that really allows these individuals to stay connected to their community and make friends and lifelong connection that creates a circle of safety with trust, love, and acceptance as who you are. So one of the examples I would like to talk about is an organization based in Chicago, Illinois. It's called Misericordia. It's been around for many, many years. It's led by the executive director, who's actually a Catholic nun, Sister Rosemary, and she just celebrated her 50th year anniversary as the executive director. And it started as a home for maybe 30 children with special needs. And as their needs grew, she started expanding. And it's interesting, when she was actually providing this care for these children, at a certain age, they had to transition out to an institution that was run by states. And when she actually went to the state institution, she just felt like she needed to keep the kids at home. So the regulators came to her home and said, "You are keeping those children, and they're beyond age of 5. And she said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" And she said, "What are you going to do about it?" And they walked away. So over the course of all these years, because of the need, and many families with gratitude, they've been able to raise enough money to expand to now they're serving about 600 children and adults with special needs, and they have 1,100 dedicated employees, including medical director, clinic, specialized clinics, 85 nurses, and many, many dedicated employees that are very committed to creating this beautiful community for individuals with special needs. And their homes are ICF homes, intermediary care facilities, community living apartments, and community group homes. It's important to know that most of the homes are actually on campus, and they have, in-house bakery truck, cafe, gift shop, recycling center, art studio, music and dancing studios. And so, but it's also important to know that many of these individuals have work programs and community programs on-site and off-site. So if you actually go to Chicago, like I go to Chicago pretty often, and one time this is Sister Rosemary, and this is beautiful, one of the beautiful structures of Misericordia. And I'm in an Uber, and the Uber driver goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to Misericordia." And the guy's like, "Oh, I blame them for my weight gain because I go there for food, I go there for bakeries." And they just opened another bakery in the suburb, and they have really, if you go to misericordia.com, you can order holiday packaged goods, which are amazing. They have the best Irish soda bread that I order. So, and they have music programs. It's just an amazing community. They're very integrated into the greater community, and the community embraces Misericordia. Another great example that I had the privilege of visiting is the Center for Discovery, which is 2 hours north of New York. And they serve over 1,200 children and adults with complex disabilities. And this community actually does serve individuals with severe challenges. And they have over 1,700 employees, medical staff, researchers, amazing dedicated teachers. They serve, children, students, you name it. This is an amazing community. New York is so blessed to have them. They also closed on a building last year that will turn into a specialized children's hospital that will provide inpatient services so that they will serve children that are at the risk of being institutionalized because of their severe challenges to be able to be treated so that they can easily transition back into the community. And they're very research-driven, very sophisticated. They were actually funded by Google to develop and come up with an innovative wheelchair. If you actually go to their research lab and technology lab, they have designed accessible furniture. You can just press a button that the sink goes up and down. It's just an amazing community. And they also believe that food is medicine. So they have over 1,000-acre of biodynamic farm and organic farm, and they bring great celebrity chefs, not just celebrities, but great chefs from all over from Manhattan to come and use their ingredients to find amazing culinary program to treat their individuals with special needs. And they are also using music therapy, art therapy to, really integrate everything into, their care. And so I was there last December, and I think I spent about maybe 6 hours there, and I think I covered maybe 1/4 because they are the largest employer of that county, and they employ about 1,700 individuals. So but at the same time they serve about 160 adults, and most of the individuals they serve are children. And there's a long wait list, but we really look to the Center for Discovery for inspiration and their leadership to treat individuals with severe challenges. So this is an incubator, and they own properties all over the county. So the last example that I would like to use, and these are only the 3 that I have in this presentation, but there are a good number of great intentional communities across the country that really serve the evolving needs of the individuals that have disabilities that could change over time. So Annandale Village was founded about 50 years ago, and it's based in Suwanee, Georgia. They serve over 170 individuals and day program participants, and about 155 employees serve there. They have different level of homes. Some of them are very independent housing apartments. Some of them are cottages, they offer higher level of care. They also have assisted living community, skilled nursing facility, and they have off-site campus communities as well, and that's actually fairly new. And they also provide day program and vocation services. So there's one story that I would like to share about a resident that was at Annandale Village. She came in when her mother passed away after her fight with cancer. So when she came, her mother was actually, her mother had cared for her so much that, this woman had no friends outside of her mother and the family. She didn't know how to even brush her teeth. She didn't know how to bathe herself. And when she came to Annandale, she told staff that she would like to learn how to do that. So they trained her. Within a few months, she was able to actually move into an independent living community on her own with light level of support. And she soon got a job at McDonald's, worked there for 11 years. In her mid-50s, she started experiencing dementia. And eventually, she had to move to assisted living facility and retire from McDonald's. And then a few months later, they threw a big retirement party, gave her a big membership card where she could have access to McDonald's for free for the rest of her life. And so when she did that, and then a few months later, she actually died peacefully in her nursing care at Annandale Village. And her brother felt such gratitude that his sister was able to live and die peacefully, that now he's actually serving on the board of Annandale so that many other individuals like her could have that access to the opportunities that she was able to have. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come to me and I'll be happy to talk. Thank you.
Okay, we do have time.